Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, April 21st, 5 p.m. Project Homekey 2.0 information session. My name is Andrew, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the county, Karis.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Karis Fads, and I'm the acting director for Marin County Health and Human Services Whole Person Care Program. And I'm here with Andrew tonight to talk to you a little bit about California's Project Homekey and what it means to Marin. You have heard about it, or you might not have. It doesn't matter. We'll go over the basics for you here tonight. The first round of Project Homekey actually launched last summer, and Marin County was able to successfully acquire 2 properties through it. We got one in Corte, Madera, and the other one is in San Rafael. And both of these were started as interim housing initially, and they're being converted to permanent supportive housing. And that's going to give us 66 new units in Marin County of permanent supportive housing that we didn't even have to build from scratch. And permanent supportive housing is pretty much what it sounds like from the name. It's permanent, so you can live there as long as you need to. And it's supportive, so it comes with supports that help people succeed and stay stable and move on with their lives in this housing opportunity. So the governor has requested a second round of funding, and it's $750 million this time for a new round of Project Homekey. And because it is possible that his request will be approved by the legislature, we're trying to get a head start on it this time. And that's why we have you here tonight to hear how this is going to work in Marin and hopefully get some of your feedback. So a little bit of background information. The last time we did the visible count of people experiencing homelessness, which was in January 2019, we had over 1,000 Marin neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. And we know this is usually an undercount, but at least it's something that we can use to compare every time we do it to see change over time. And we're excited about Project Homekey because it gives us the opportunity to create the solution to that problem, which is permanent housing. And that's an elusive but important thing, as you can imagine, those of you who live in a home, how important that is. So lots of folks are seeing now more visible homelessness, especially since COVID started, and we acknowledge that. That's definitely something that we hear from folks and we see ourselves, and it is upsetting and concerning to see. A lot of the people who are experiencing homelessness, who are out and about in the encampments or living on the street, who you may have seen, we know who have been homeless in Marin County for quite some time. So a lot of them grew up here, maybe went to the same school that you went to or your kids went to, and their families are part of our community, and they're part of our community as well. Some folks have disabilities, and they need this type of extra support in a permanent home to be successful. And so Project Homekey is part of the governor's plan to make a dent in homelessness and really help California move forward. And we feel fortunate to have been able to take advantage of that opportunity last year, and we're hoping with your enthusiastic support and contributions in your own ways to be able to do that again this time. So we wanted to have a discussion tonight about how this is going to work so that you or your community and the county can be ready for this funding opportunity. So a little bit more background information. Marin was one of the only counties in California to reduce chronic homelessness from 2017 to 2019, according to that point in time count that I mentioned. And over the past year, we've actually accelerated our rate of housing people experiencing homelessness, putting them into permanent supportive housing opportunities. And here's how we did it. Going back to 2015, our system in Marin had 193 units or homes that count as permanent supportive housing. But if you fast forward to January 2020, we were up to 514 of these. And it's not that we were out there with our hammers and nails building them. Basically, we've been adding a lot of them through vouchers, and we added an additional 75 through the use of federal mainstream vouchers just in 2020 alone. So all of these opportunities added together have brought us up to 589 units of permanent supportive housing from 193. So we feel pretty proud about that and feel like this is an important part of really addressing chronic homelessness in Marin to go from 193 units to 589 units in 6 years. One of the ways we did this was by launching the Whole Person Care Program, which is the program that I'm acting director for, and we provide intensive client-centered services through our community partners who deliver the services. And we've also acted as a convener, getting all the homeless service providers acting together really as one community, including our housing authority, to work together on our goals of ending chronic and veteran homelessness. And we're very fortunate to have the housing authority as a strong partner in this work as well. So I'd like to turn it over tonight to Andrew Henning. Andrew is the one who's going to give you the bulk of the content, and I'll be here to help. Andrew's with Opening Doors, and Opening Doors is a private-public partnership of funders and policymakers from across Marin that are dedicated to ending chronic and veteran homelessness. And Andrew is the organization's project director.
Awesome. Thank you, Karis. And thank you again to everyone that took the time out to join us this afternoon, early evening. We have a presentation for you building on a lot of the great information that Karis shared. And I am going to share my screen here for you. So this is the 9th of 10 Project Homekey 2.0 info session. So hopefully this is still as fresh as number one. I think it's gotten better with each one. So again, I appreciate you joining us tonight. Again, I'm Andrew Henning. I'm the project director with Opening Doors Marin, and I'm here with Karis Baz. Karis, if you maybe want to drop our emails in the chat, if anyone has any questions or comments or things you wish you asked when this is over, feel free to reach out directly to us, and we're happy to field any questions or concerns or comments that you might have. In terms of housekeeping, I just wanted to give a heads up. I know I saw some people trickle in. This is being recorded, and all the sessions have been recorded. Tomorrow morning is our 10th and final session. And so tomorrow, hopefully by lunchtime, my goal is to send out all of the recordings. They're already available on YouTube, but send out all the recordings, the slides, and then another link to our survey. So just as a heads up, you can get access to all that, and I'll be sending it out tomorrow. Tonight, we're going to be doing a quick, kind of a shortish presentation. And at the end of that presentation, we'll be fielding questions from the chat. So if you have any questions, you can either use the Q&A function that you'll see here on Zoom or the chat. Either way works. And then we'll also have a survey that you can complete at the end too. We are going to primarily focus on Project Homekey. I am going to talk a little bit about homelessness and build on some of the stuff that Karis had talked about. But if you have more general homelessness questions, this isn't 100% the forum for that, but we'll try to answer whatever we can that comes up. I don't anticipate at this point, hopefully, any quote unquote Zoom bombing, but if we have any technical issues or anything like that, I do have everyone's email address, and I can follow up with you afterwards if we need to end the session early or it ends itself. Hopefully we don't have a technical issue like that, but just to give you a heads up. And then lastly, just as a heads up too, the county has a great FAQ page, marincounty.org/main/homekey. You can also just Google Marin County Project Homekey, and you should be able to find it. And it's got information from Homekey 1.0, more information about 2.0, and it's a great resource for you moving forward. So the agenda, so we're doing welcomes and introductions. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about homelessness in Marin overall, talk a little bit about Opening Doors, but then the meat of this presentation is really Homekey and your Q&A about Homekey. So homelessness in Marin. So just as a heads up, I have a 45-minute version of this presentation. So I'm giving you the abridged 5-minute version. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But basically, as Karis said, our systems change approach to homelessness really began about 5 years ago. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but it really came down to this core insight that we realized that most of our challenges from homelessness were stemming from a small group of people experiencing chronic homelessness. And chronic homelessness is basically long-term homelessness accompanied by some sort of disabling condition like a health issue, behavioral health issue, traumatic brain injury, or oftentimes many of these conditions at the same time. And so if you were to look at people that are temporarily homeless, which is actually the majority of people that experience homelessness, to people that are long-term chronically homeless, studies both locally and across the country have found that people experiencing chronic homelessness can cost on average $60,000 per year in public services. So like EMS transports, emergency room visits, other public safety interventions. And again, that's just to be homeless on an annual basis. And so that alone is certainly reason enough for us to take action. But more than that, just morally, ethically, part of the reason for that is that these are the most vulnerable folks in our homeless community. These are people who, in some cases, have been homeless for 10, 20, 30 years in our community. And studies have found that people experiencing chronic homelessness pass away on average 25 years earlier than their housed peers, not from an acute night of cold, but from long-term chronic health issues. And that's really what Karis's team is really focused on, is this whole person care and focusing on the most medically fragile. So what we realized back in 2016 is that most of our historical focus had been on this part of the curve. We had a lot of great programs and services, but we weren't necessarily focused on and really prioritizing chronic homelessness. And so back in 2015, 2016, we started taking our policymakers around the region to understand how other communities were addressing chronic homelessness. We went up to Sonoma, to the South Bay, to the East Bay. We took our city leaders, our county leaders, staff, and we really learned what other communities were doing. And at the same time, we also started mapping our own local system by looking at the lived experience of our own local people that were experiencing chronic homelessness. And as you can see from this map, homelessness is denoted in the middle, housing's on the outside. We had unintentionally over the years created a somewhat convoluted system where it was very hard for people to go from being homeless to actually being housed. And as I said earlier, we were dealing with a population that was inherently challenging to serve because of these underlying health vulnerabilities. And what had happened was we basically created all these programs that had, barriers. They weren't intended to be barriers, but these programs had barriers. And so people were failing out of our programs. They were becoming more distrustful of the system. They weren't seeking help. And then they got worse. Their situation got worse. And as I said earlier, we had in some cases people that had been homeless in Marin for 20, 30, even 40 years. In a few cases. And that obviously wasn't working for the community. And it certainly wasn't working for these folks that were on the street for so long. So what we realized from our tours is that we didn't need necessarily a new program that was meant to help mental health or substance abuse. We really needed a new process for recognizing the unique needs of individual people. And so one of the programs that we had learned about was called the Homeless Outreach Team, or the HOT program. And this had been based down in San Mateo County. And we decided to launch this program here as a pilot in downtown San Rafael. And I should note that this program, both the San Rafael Marin version and the San Mateo version, have been named statewide best practices by the League of California Cities. And the basic methodology is we got the city, the county, our nonprofit leaders together in a room, and we really just focused on a list of the dozen or so most visible, vulnerable, chronically homeless people and said, can we get them housed? What we had learned through all of our different tours is that there was this emerging, and it really frankly wasn't emerging, it had been around for 20 plus years, but there was a best practice nationally called Housing First, where rather than having people navigate that maze of services, they go directly from being homeless to being housed with intensive wraparound services. And that ends up being 200 to 300% more effective than the status quo. And so the result of that was that over the first 18 months of this initiative, we were able to house 23 of the most vulnerable chronically homeless people in downtown San Rafael. People who, frankly, I think a lot of us felt like there's no way we're ever going to get them inside again, started having success. So because of that success and that early pilot result, in 2017, in fact, October 1st of 2017, we decided to launch this, what we call the by name list methodology, county-wide. And if you want to learn more about this approach, we've actually subsequently joined the Built for Zero movement, which is led by an organization nationally called Community Solutions. This is a movement of now over 80 communities in the United States and Canada, from California to the Mississippi Gulf to the East Coast to the Midwest, who are all using this strategy to measurably reduce and in some cases actually finally end chronic and veteran homelessness. And so they actually just got a $100 million grant from the MacArthur Foundation to accelerate this work nationally. So this is really, I think, on the cutting edge of what works. And it's something that we've been in for at least almost 4 years now. And the impact is, as Karis described, has been significant. So from 2017 to 2019, we saw a almost 30% reduction in chronic homelessness based on our point in time count numbers. And since October 1st, October 1st of 2017, we've housed over 320 of the most vulnerable chronically homeless people countywide. Unfortunately, this one stat's a little bit out of date. Our retention rate has dropped to 94%, but nationwide, Housing First programs typically have about an 85% retention rate. So we're still doing extremely well with keeping all these folks permanently housed once they get off the street. And as we originally hypothesized, at least the data that we have from San Rafael for people that were homeless to then being housed, we've also seen major reductions in public service utilization, which again was really one of the goals. So the question at this point is always how, and Karis gave you some of the numbers, but just to really make this concrete, we've had an incredible partnership with the Marin Housing Authority, who's been providing housing vouchers to us in order to pair that with supportive services like whole person care. And so we've been able to successfully house hundreds of people in scattered site rental units from Mill Valley to Novato, Larkspur, all the way out to Inverness. And so they're people that have been chronically homeless in our community for decades in some cases, who are already living in our communities that are now doing very well in housing. So that's been a huge reason we've gotten so many people housed. The second, though, and we can't rely 100% on just private sector rentals, is that we really need to start creating more restricted affordable housing as well. And so projects like Victory Village, which was a senior housing project in Fairfax, we were able to carve out some permanent supportive housing units in that project. Homeward Bound of Marin is rebuilding the Mill Street Center in San Rafael to include 32 additional units of housing, plus rebuilding the shelter. So this is really how we're trying to accelerate housing. And it's also a perfect segue to opening doors. So when we first started this change management process, if you will, back in 2016, 2017, in those early days, we convened a group that we were calling the Marin Chronic Homeless Action Task Force, or MCHAT for short. And in the first 2 years of that effort, it was really about stakeholder education and alignment. So bringing the county, the cities and towns, our service providers, the faith-based community, philanthropy, business, all of these groups together to learn about the by name list, to learn about Housing First, and to really understand like why we were shifting our system this way. And what we realized at the end of those 2 years is that if our collective was going to have an impact in accelerating this work, the biggest value add was creating more housing, and specifically addressing the biggest bottleneck to more housing, which is more local capital or more local money for being able to pursue opportunities. So in early 2019, MCHAT rebranded itself as Opening Doors Marin and became a fiscally sponsored 501c3 nonprofit under the Center for Volunteer Nonprofit Leadership based here in Marin. And that entire first year that we were a 501c3, we spent looking at the feasibility of a public revenue measure. So doing polling, looking at basically like public sentiments around housing. And the reason for this is that there have been other communities in the Bay Area, around the state, that have passed public revenue measures to provide local capital for housing. And what's important about this is that what we learned, and I think a lot of people already know, is that in Marin, we really value local control over our housing and planning and land use decisions. And that's really the value add of a local revenue measure, is that we would have the money to be able to pursue the projects that made sense for our community. Unfortunately, there was ultimately not enough political support for public revenue measure. So in 2020, we pivoted to putting together a community business plan for what we thought it would take in terms of housing and services to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And that was the plan: finish the business plan, do some private fundraising, try to find regional philanthropic partners. And then COVID happened and our kind of work plan changed. If you wanted to learn more about Opening Doors, happy again to talk to anyone about that. You can visit openingdoorsmarin.org. I would also encourage people to check out this organization, Destination Home. Destination Home is a similar public-private partnership in Santa Clara County that's probably 10 years ahead of where we are right now, but they have also helped to generate public revenue options for housing in the South Bay. And they've also been able to raise, at this point, tens of millions of dollars from the tech sector to support the work around ending chronic homelessness and helping people stay in their homes. So definitely worth a look. So Homekey 1.0, that brings us to Homekey 1.0. So in order to understand Project Homekey, we need to understand a confusingly named predecessor, Project Roomkey. And basically, when shelter in place started in March of 2020, within a few short weeks, the state said, we need to do something dramatic to help people experiencing homelessness get off the street. Again, as I said earlier, many people experiencing homelessness have underlying health vulnerabilities. And so there was a real fear about a breakout of COVID among the homeless community and the disastrous impact that can have with people passing away or having other long-term health complications. So the state rolled out this program that allowed for communities to lease hotel and motel rooms in a non-congregate capacity. And basically, congregate shelter is, you could imagine, a large auditorium with a lot of cots and people staying there. That's obviously not a good environment for COVID. And so non-congregate shelter is individual units. And ultimately, that program helped over 22,000 people find shelter, and almost every community in California in some way participated in that program. And so based on the success of that, in June of 2020, Karis and I were laughing earlier because we were very much involved in all of that. It felt like a year went from April to June, but really just in 2 months, the state, recognizing that the impact of this program, said, hey, can we actually make this permanent? And so they decided to reallocate $750 million from federal coronavirus relief funding for this program called Project Homekey, which was basically an opportunity for communities to acquire and look at adaptive reuse of hotels, motels, and other commercial buildings to actually make permanent units. They announced this program in June conceptually. They came out with a notice of funding availability in July, and we had to submit applications less than a month later. And because it was federal funding that was basically use it or lose it, we had to acquire those units, like close escrow, acquire the units by the end of the calendar year, and they had to be at least 50% operational within 90 days. And despite these, frankly, somewhat crazy constraints, across the state, almost 6,000 units were acquired, and almost over 9,000 people were actually served. And so when you think about the fact that there are 150,000 people experiencing homelessness in California, this was a huge, huge impact. And as Kara said, so locally we had 2 Project Homekey projects. One was 3301 Kerner, which was a commercial building in San Rafael. And then the other was the Casa Buena in Corte, Madera. And that is 19 units, 18 of which are permanent supportive housing. One is a manager's unit. And I want to say here that, again, this happened way faster than any of us would have ever asked for or anticipated. Victory Village, by comparison, which is another affordable housing project I talked about earlier, that was a multi-year process of designing the site, getting community buy-in, going to the planning commission, the city council. And so projects usually have a lot longer vetting period. For this, we had less than 6 months. And so obviously and understandably, there was concern and trepidation from the community about, is this actually a good idea? And I think what's really amazing is that the town of Corte Madera, subsequent to the acquisition of this site, has formed a citizen advisory committee to help guide and ensure that this project is successful. This is actually a group that Opening Doors is helping to facilitate. And this group is looking at things like how to communicate with the community, exterior redesign options, success measures and other evaluation for the site, as well as volunteer opportunities to get involved. And we actually on Monday night had our first community forum since the project officially launched. So that was exciting to see and have an opportunity to meet with the community. But I wanted to show you this video. It's a couple minutes, but this is a virtual ribbon cutting that this committee put together. And I think it really shows you how, despite, again, understandable initial concerns, these programs can really be adopted and embraced by the community. So I'm gonna play this short video now.
On behalf of Corte Madera's elected officials, staff, and residents, I'd like to welcome you to the Casa Buena, Corte Madera's first permanent supportive housing for those that experience homelessness. This was all brought together by a collaborative effort that included the County of Marin, Catholic Charities, Open Door Marin, town staff, and Corte Madera residents, who are also providing monetary and in-kind donations.
Marin has worked very hard over the past 3 years to address our homeless population. And with the Homekey project in Corte Madera at Casa Buena, we will be able to provide needed housing for 18 of our most vulnerable residents while wrapping all the services the county has to offer around them. I want to thank the community of Corte Madera their city council, and the Casa Buena Steering Committee for working with the county to make this possible.
When I first heard of plans to build a homeless shelter in Corte Madera, I was very much opposed to it. It wasn't until I did a bunch of research on my own that I began to realize that permanent supportive housing can be an important solution to the homeless issue we have here in Marin County.
A safe home helps transform lives and creates essential stability, healing, independence, and dignity founded on hope. Our partnership with Marin County through Project Homekey and Homekey impacts many lives. Together, we strive to end homelessness in Marin.
From Corte Madera to Novato, Larkspur to Inverness, we have successfully housed hundreds of our community's most vulnerable chronically homeless people. Because of projects like this and the support of community members like you, I know we can reach our goal of being the first county in the Bay Area to end chronic homelessness.
One of the ideas we had was to create welcome baskets that could be given to each new resident when they move in. So we sent people shopping for everything from toothpaste to shampoo to snacks, cozy slippers, and grocery store gift cards. And the response from the community was frankly overwhelming. So many people wanted to be a part of this. It really embodies the spirit of Corte Madera as a welcoming place.
So on behalf of Corte Madera, I'd like to welcome our newest residents.
Welcome to Corte Madera!
So as you can see, these projects definitely can be embraced and really supported by the community. And I don't think Scott would mind me saying this. He kind of said in the video, but again, he was someone that was very skeptical of one of these sites. And now having joined the committee, done his own research, I think really sees that our strategy for addressing homelessness in Marin, these types of housing projects, again, the county being such a great service provider and making sure that people are supported in their housing, it really can be a solution. And so that group really wants this to be a model, this community advisory group to be a model for future permanent supportive housing projects in Marin, as well as frankly, all across the country. And hopefully we'll have a chance to actually scale that model up. So that takes us to Project Homekey 2.0. And again, I want to just say, technically there is no Project Homekey 2.0 yet. At this point, as Kara said earlier, Governor Newsom has proposed an additional $750 million for a Homekey 2.0 in his current proposed budget. The legislature has not taken action yet. We think that it could happen and take action as soon as next month. But again, this has not been confirmed. Based on the urgency in which, or the speed at which the first NOFA, or the Notice of Funding Availability came out with Homekey 1.0, if the legislature acted next month, we are acting as though the NOFA will also probably come out almost immediately. And that's really was the vision and goal of doing these workshops, is that last time we didn't get to do a lot of this front end engagement, even though we would have wanted to or would have liked to. And so this is really our chance to hear from you, get your feedback as we plan for a possible Homekey 2.0. But again, because there is no official program yet, a lot of our assumptions are based on what we know from Homekey 1.0. So what do we know? So assume criteria based on 1.0. So first and foremost, the state is requiring that a government entity be the lead applicant for the funding. So that could be a city, it could be a county, housing authority, tribal government, but it needs to be led by a governmental entity. That governmental entity can be joined by co-applicants such as nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, service providers. There could even be a city-county tag team application, but you just need to have a lead governmental agency. Like last time, we're expecting that the funding is going to be for the flexible acquisition and conversion of hotels, motels, commercial sites. We also know from Homekey 1.0 that some communities for example, acquired trailers or other kind of modular units that were intended for basically long-term permanent housing, but it was a way to quickly acquire and install housing units. So that's also an option. And then we're also expecting that we're gonna have to close escrow and really, finalize the deal for these sites by the end of the calendar year, and that they're gonna have to be operational within 90 days, at least 50% operational, like Homekey 1.0. What I have not talked about is the funding, and Homekey 1.0 did require a local funding match, and that's important. And I wanted to dig into that for a little bit. So the way to think about the Homekey subsidy is that it's based on the per unit acquisition cost. So basically, for a per unit acquisition cost for the first $0 to $100,000, the state fully covers the cost of $100,000. From $100,000 to $200,000, it's a 1-to-1 match, state to local, 50,000 state, 50,000 local, and 200,000 to 350,000, it's a 1-to-2 match, so 50,000 state, 100,000 local. So basically, to get the full state match, a local community would have to contribute $150,000 to get $200,000, or basically a total per unit acquisition cost of $350,000. Why is this important? So as you can see in this hypothetical, if we had a 50 unit project costing $200,000 per unit, we would only have to contribute $50,000. The state would contribute $150,000 per unit, and that would total from the state $7.5 million. We would have to contribute 2.5. But if that per unit acquisition cost went up just $90,000, our contribution would go up to $110,000 per unit, or $5.5 million. And what's important about that is, as I said earlier, this was the whole genesis of opening doors Marin, is the lack of local housing capital to move on these projects. So the state funding is super critical, and the per unit cost is also critical, because at some point we can't afford the local match. So I just wanted to let everyone know about the mechanics of that. So because of that's helping to inform our draft local criteria, what kind of projects we're looking for. So first and foremost, and I'm actually gonna, I'm gonna go in the order I've been going. So the first thing is we're looking for projects that are not in areas of concentrated poverty. And there are two reasons for that. The first is just, I think, for our team, morally, ethically, we don't want to keep putting housing, especially for people that are maybe lower income, in already low income communities. We want to make sure that we're providing housing across the county, that it's equitable, and that it's in diverse income brackets and areas. So that's number one. And number two is also operational. So as I said earlier, a big reason for our success has been partnering with the Marin Housing Authority to be able to use Section 8 vouchers or other housing vouchers. Housing vouchers are not free housing. If you have a housing voucher, it basically means that you, as the voucher holder, contribute 30% of your income towards the rent, and then the voucher covers the remaining amount of rent up to market rate. And what's important about that is that when we finance a lot of affordable housing, we do what's called place basing the voucher, or basically the voucher, rather than being tied to an individual, is tied to the room or the unit. And so for these projects, that's important, because that basically allows us to cover the operational cost of the unit. So that could be maintenance, property management, security. It also helps to pay for the services, and the services are why we have a 94% retention rate. So that's very key. The Housing Authority cannot issue place-based vouchers in areas of concentrated poverty. So that's why this criteria is here. Number two is that, and similarly related, is we want geographically distributed projects. We're not trying to have all of our Homekey sites in one community. We would like to have a portfolio that represents projects throughout the county. Next is participation from nonprofit developers. So what's key is that Homekey, again, is for the acquisition of units. It's not necessarily for the rehab of units. And so one of the ways that we finance the rehab of units is through something called low-income tax credits. And low-income tax credits are a housing financial source that nonprofit developers can tap. And so we want to try to find projects where we can get participation from nonprofit developers to thus bring more money for that rehab later on. And so based on the cost structure and how these nonprofit developers work, they really also need, in order to make it work financially for them, projects that are of a certain scale. And typically that's about 45 units or larger. I don't want to say hard and fast we can't do projects that are less than 45 units because every site's different. But generally speaking, we are looking for projects that are a little bit on the larger side. And then again, because of the subsidy, we're looking for, or the cap on the subsidy, we're looking for projects that are less than $350,000 per unit and ideally less than $250,000 per unit. And then lastly, we don't want projects that are in the middle of nowhere. We want to make sure that people are connected to transit, to groceries, to healthcare. And the state also in the Homekey 1.0 application gave points for communities that had projects that were actually integrated in the community. So that's important to us as well. So in terms of next steps, again, this is the 9th of 10 community information sessions. The county, I got another update on this today. They are rapidly finalizing a request for interest that will go out to property owners throughout the community to see if they're open to selling. And then people have also been submitting ideas for projects through our survey, which I'll talk about momentarily. We're really trying to use these information sessions to solicit ideas for projects and then also get criteria on some of the, get feedback on some of the criteria that I just described. And I'll tell you how you can do that momentarily. And then as these projects come in, we have a team that includes the county opening doors, some local funders, again, these nonprofit developers that we partner with to really evaluate the feasibility of different projects. Are they actually for sale? How much is it going to cost? How much rehab is going to be required? And then based on that ongoing due diligence, we're hoping to be in a good place to be able to then submit our portfolio of applications when the NOFA comes out. So I'm going to show here in a second, I'm going to just copy and paste the link. I'll put it in the chat for you, but we have a survey and feel free to share this survey beyond people that were here tonight. But we're trying to get your feedback on the process. What are factors that would lead you to support a Homekey site, factors that would lead you to oppose a Homekey site, and again, if you have actual project ideas. So here's the link. I'm not going to expect you to copy this over now. Like I said, I'll paste it into the chat. But that's the presentation. So again, really appreciate you listening to that. And I'm going to stop screen sharing. And Karis, if we have any questions as I'm backing out of this, if you want to start the Q&A, I'll copy the survey link and then we keep answering questions.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for that presentation. And this is your moment, audience members. We would love to hear your questions. You can put them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A feature if you prefer. And I see we have one question coming in, and hopefully the rest of you are madly typing in your questions right now. So Andrew, the first question here is the cost of updating the selected site included in the cost per unit calculation, or is that just the cost of the property?
Yeah, from what I remember from the first time, and I'm happy to follow up with you, Nicholas, because I want to make sure I get this right for you. I'm almost 95% certain it's just for the acquisition. I do know, and I confirmed this with HCD, which is the state housing department, is if communities are like acquiring things like trailers or other things like that for their Homekey project, that could be the initial funding could be used for that. But for long-term rehabilitation of these sites, like for a very concrete example, 3301 Kerner was an office building, and it's currently being occupied by Homeward Bound as interim housing or basically emergency shelter while Mill Street 2.0 is being completed. So once Mill Street 2.0 is completed, Homeward Bound is going to vacate that building, and then the rehab is going to take place for that site. And so even though we have a sense of what that rehab cost could cost or what the rehab costs could be, we could not factor that into the state subsidy for acquiring 3301. So, there might be some like small things that we could budget in, but it's almost entirely the acquisition of the property that the Homekey subsidy is for.
Thank you for that, Andrew, and thank you, Nicholas, for that great question. Other questions from our audience, please go ahead and put them into the chat. We would love to hear from you. Or maybe you're busy filling out the survey, which you can do now, or you can and do it later. That's okay too.
And one of the common questions is people are maybe typing or thinking of questions that we've heard almost universally. And I guess I'm starting to head it off by just saying this, but there has been the question of, what's the next step? How can I be more involved? We are going to be sending out, I think I said this at the beginning, tomorrow, hopefully by about lunchtime, I'll send out the slides. I'll send out a link to the survey, a link to all the recordings. And so again, we're really hoping that this is a robust community process where people can watch the videos, provide their input. So we'd really love your help at this stage of the game to really blast out that information and let people know. The IJ ran a story about this, Patch ran a story. We did a press release, the city and town electeds and PIOs have all been informed. So we're really just trying to get this information out as best as we can.
Great. Other questions? We're here for you.
Anything else that you remember from the, oh, here we go. Can you describe a bit more about how ongoing wraparound services will be funded? Is this the county, the cities and towns, or both? I'm happy to take that, or Karis, whichever.
Yeah, why don't I give it a start, and then Andrew, you can chime in. So this is a great question, and I think that that there could be multiple opportunities here, but the projects that we've done so far have wraparound services that are funded through county sources. So of course, the county is bringing in funding from other sources, including state and sometimes federal funding opportunities. However, if cities or towns did have the ability to fund additional services, that could be a good avenue, especially if someone wanted to do a more local-based project. Andrew, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we, especially for Homekey 1.0, the county deserves a ton of credit. I mean, they really tried to do everything they could to make sure that we had the services that we needed to make these sites successful. And I think for especially moving forward, we want to really, again, kind of bake into the actual initial business plan for these sites an ability to finance the services essentially into perpetuity, using housing vouchers as probably one of the primary vehicles for that. If you think about it, when we rent, if someone receives a Section 8 voucher and then they rent a unit in the community, that subsidy is going to the property owner. And, you know, that's okay. That's how the rental market works. But if we're able to basically have these projects that are through a nonprofit developer or one of our local service providers, then all of that revenue is coming into that program. And so that's able to finance long-term, again, property management, maintenance, security, as well as supportive services. So that's really the goal, is that if we can find the right project and get it financed through the use of housing vouchers, then that basically funds itself. And that's like really the dream of what you want to do.
Great. So I see two new questions. There's one about, are there opportunities for partnerships?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's definitely many layers of partnerships. I mean, so there's certainly partnerships around the actual applications. So, you know, if you're with an organization that's somehow involved with housing, and you feel like you want to maybe be involved with the application, or, you know, you'd have some way to help advance like the actual acquisition of a site, let me know. I mean, that's a very specific type of partnership, but that's great. And then again, moving forward, this is kind of phase one of 2 or 3 phases of community engagement around this. And I think the next phase is going to be after we apply for projects, we're going to want to work very intensely with communities to really make sure that they understand what these projects are. And then, you know, if there's feedback about how we need to modify them or what that might look like to get the community supporting, we would love the support of local organizations and partners to help have those community conversations. So those are 2 of the biggest at this point I can think of. Anything, Karis, that you would add?
Well, I just want to add that really the way we are ending chronic homelessness in Marin and veteran homelessness is through partnerships. I mean, partnerships is our middle name, and that's your middle name too. The whole community is part of this. So yes, absolutely. And I see we have 2 similar questions that came in. Is it okay if I?
Yeah.
These are really questions. So this is about the distinction between interim housing, which is temporary, and as someone leaves, someone else could come in, and permanent supportive housing. So the units that we are being given this opportunity to acquire, if the legislature approves this, and the ones that we already did acquire, are for permanent supportive housing. Permanent means until you die or move away, or you win the lottery, something else happens. Permanent means it's yours to stay. And we are using the 2 sites that we already acquired as interim housing just until we can get the progress in the renovations to get everything all set up for permanent supportive housing. But the state is not handing out this money for interim housing in this project. This is for permanent housing. So there is no time-bound component, and no, they are not expected to cycle through, as someone asked here. Andrew, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, exactly. The one caveat that I would just add is that in order to meet the operational expectation from the state that it's at least 50% occupied within 90 days, the state has allowed communities to operate the site as interim housing on an initial basis to get people moved in. And then they do grant the ability. I mean, the goal is, and the long-term requirement is exactly like Kara said, that these are going to be for permanent units, but there is some flexibility from the state. Either if you can immediately move people in as permanent, great. If you need to operate as interim as you work to get the other financing lined up, that's also okay with them, as long as you have basically a rough timeline. And that's exactly what happened last time, is that, for both sites that we purchased, we have a plan to make them permanent, but in the interim, they're operating as interim housing. And so that's basically the state's requirement, is that as long as it's occupied, we just want people in them, but the long-term goal is it needs to be converted to permanent.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And then Shannon's question, how do I sign up then to win free housing permanently for the rest of my life? Well, again, as I said earlier, I think this is kind of part of the deeper presentation I do, but I think one of the important things that we learned from our early decision to focus on chronic homelessness is that the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness actually resolve their homelessness relatively quickly in a few short weeks, months, and they need very minimal government assistance or social service assistance. They might need help with a security deposit or something like that, but it's a very light touch. And I think this is my own hypothesis, but I'm going to share it here, which is that when you look at the data on reasons people become homeless, the vast majority of people become homeless because of basically economic reasons or economic displacement, a job loss, a rent increase, an eviction, a family crisis, fleeing domestic violence, a health crisis. Those precipitate a lot of these economic reasons for becoming homeless. And again, we see rapid resolution. On the other end of the spectrum, like I described earlier, people experiencing chronic homelessness, that's primarily driven around an underlying health disability. So like a behavioral health issue, a physical health issue, traumatic brain injury. And it's that underlying disability that makes it very hard for people to resolve their homelessness. And so again, the idea here, and I just want to really clarify, it's not free housing. People are paying 30% of their income, whatever their income is, and then the subsidy covers the rest. And so the idea here is that the voucher helps people that otherwise, based on, I think current SSI payments in our community is about $900 a month. So there's no way, I mean, there's almost literally no way someone could afford, even if they were on some type of disability payment, afford a unit. So the idea is really that it's helping people afford the market rate, and then they're contributing, and then we're wrapping them in support services so that they're successful in those units.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Any other questions? And I hope you will click on that link for the survey. We really would love to hear from you. That's part of why we're having these sessions, is to get a little bit of a sense of what your interest is. And you have more information on background support to share. I can share a little bit about that, and Andrew, if you want to chime in. Really, in the Whole Person Care program, we expect case managers to take a whatever it takes approach and support the individual through whatever their needs are as they transition into permanent supportive housing, and then to help them stay stable and flourish in that housing once they move in. So that is part of why we have that success rate, and it can take different forms depending on the individual. So it's not a cookie cutter program. A lot of times people, what we hear from clients themselves and what we see in terms of participants' behavior is that when you're unhoused, it's very difficult to pay attention to other things that you might wish to work on in your life. And just surviving and finding a way to meet your basic human needs is an overwhelming burden that it's until people get out and spend a little time stabilizing and realize they can be safe indoors and they don't have to stay awake and guard their possessions and things like that. Then they can move on to other life goals, and the case managers are there to support them with whatever it is they want to work on. You know, some clients need surgery that's been postponed, and so then they start working on getting their appointments lined up and referrals and in shape to have the surgery. Others are working on sobriety or mental health treatment. Now that they're housed, they can start thinking about taking some of these steps. Other clients, that may be education or employment, or even reconnecting with family or reconnecting with hobbies or exercise or other activities. So case managers are really expected to support them both in pursuing whatever their desires are for improving in their life, and smoothing over with the little things that may come up with if there's conflict with a neighbor, or with if they need assistance learning about budgeting, or figuring out how to pay their utilities, or just with the adjustments to living indoors. Andrew, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, honestly, that's great. I mean, yeah, it's really meant to be robust. And so anything someone needs to be successful in that housing, that's really our goal, is to keep them housed and not have them return to the street.
Are there groups of individuals to get the housing, such as rehab, veterans, families? A great question. Andrew, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our overall system is really, again, prioritizing vulnerability. That's really been kind of our organizing principle over the last few years, is really people that are, in a position that need that extra help. That being said, we're also working on, we've housed, I think since the start of coordinated entry, close to 50 homeless veterans. We're actually getting very close to almost eliminating veteran homelessness in Marin County based on that Build for Zero methodology that I talked about earlier. We also have, using that same kind of by name list approach, we're working on families. We know families that are unsheltered, families that are sheltered. We're also prioritizing them based on their vulnerability for housing. And so basically these projects as well, this was a question that came up in another info session. Homekey projects are not necessarily required to be chronically homeless single adults. There could be families or other populations that we end up serving. But again, it's about finding how we finance the services and make all that work. That's really key. So that's a good question. There's
Great.
Question. What's the early word from clients newly housed at the Casa Buena? How's it going? Well, I think to this point, I think what's going well is that this group of folks that's being housed there, again, is being really prioritized because of their health and their vulnerability. So we're seeing people that are in really kind of a dire situation that are getting into shelter and are starting to get that wraparound support that Karis was talking about. I think it was December. It was about November to December of last year. There was a period where I think it was actually sadly the worst month that we've seen, at least in the time I've been working on homelessness in Marin, which is about 8 years, where we had, I think, over close to a dozen people pass away on the street. And so really that's what this is all about, is preventing these early deaths and getting people into a more dignified setting so that they can thrive. So that's really the goal. And again, that's what we've seen anecdotally and with the data. Karis, anything you want to add to that, or?
No, I don't have any, super specific client stories, but I know that people are getting moved in and settled, and that the case management services on site are, getting people in the door and stable. So thank you for that one. There's another question about ongoing management and facilities operations. Are we involved or just in the building?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a really important question. And that also goes back to the importance of having nonprofit developers at the table, because that's really what they do. I mean, a lot of those organizations, like as an example, it might be typical that you'd have a nonprofit developer own the site, provide that property management facilities, do the maintenance, all that kind of stuff, and then maybe have a different nonprofit service provider who's actually providing the services for people. So that's super critical. That's also, again, why we want to make sure the financing for these projects checks out, because we want to make sure that we have money for property management, facilities, in some cases security, to make sure that it's not just the services for the clients, but the building itself is in a sustainable situation. So we're definitely involved in that. We're not trying to acquire properties that are going to be, a money pit, or don't make sense financially, or are going to be, a burden like that. So it's a great question, and is almost just as important as the services for the people, is making sure we can actually provide services for the building as well.
Great.
Yeah, great questions from this group.
Yeah, we probably have time for one more or one or two more. Can we talk more about the logistics of support, laundry, groceries, etc.? I know laundry service is included in the contract for Casa Buena on site. At least that's my understanding. So there is some laundry support. I don't know the ins and outs of how exactly that works, but I know that is obviously people need to be able to do the laundry, and there is support for that. Groceries. I believe the case managers are helping make sure that people are signed up for CalFresh, which is what we call food stamps in California, to get support with buying food. But otherwise, I think people are on their own in terms of going to the store and doing their own shopping.
And this is also one of the, this is the other thing I would just add, which is that especially as these programs are converting to, our permanent housing, that's really the goal of these programs, is to help people get back into a place where they're doing their own grocery shopping, they're able to do their laundry. And so that's why we don't want these programs in the middle of nowhere. We really want to have, we want them to be close to groceries, or walkable, or at least very close in transit. I know for the Casa Buena site right now, there is laundry on site, so people can take care of that, within the building. So those are all things that are definitely key. And it's why we want to make sure that these programs aren't just isolated in the middle of nowhere, that they have that kind of wraparound support. So.
Thank you for the support. I see the sweet comment. Please do fill out that survey if you haven't yet. It's really helpful for our planning process. Even though we don't know for sure if this is going to be released, we need to act as if it will, because the timeline is expected to be, breathtakingly fast again. So we want to be. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes. Thanks, everyone. This was great. We had a small but mighty group. Awesome questions. I really appreciate it. And again, keep an eye out for that email I'll be sending out tomorrow with all the follow-up information. So have a wonderful evening. Thanks again for taking the time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.